the likelihood that you're going to be able to get the answers from your suppliers that you're going to need to document and prove that there was no forced labor in your supply chain within 30 days, I ain't betting on that.
Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
Greatly appreciate your listenership. You guys are doing fantastic for us. Lalo and I are so appreciative of you're sharing us, you're liking us, you're increasing or talking to your friends apparently because our listenership is up. So thank you for that, and continue to do so, please. And if you haven't, reach out to us on LinkedIn. Lalo and I would love to connect with us and go from there. And we post different things and comments on LinkedIn as well. So try and do that. Lalo, I don't know about you, but I'm going to tell you, this summer has been brutally hot and humid. And as we've been talking offline here, is that the Memphis area has suffered from a lot of storms, just like a lot of other parts of the country and whatnot. So I've had 2 trees go down, as I've mentioned, I think on one show, and cutting them up and all that. But how about you? Are you guys? How are you? You guys are taking vacations and stuff and getting away from that 110 El Paso, aren't you?
Yeah, I did. My wife and I had to get away for a few days because we're on day 27, I think, of 100 plus weather in a row. So so it is hot. So we went to San Diego and enjoyed no more than 85 degree weather. So it was really nice. But
probably got goosebumps on the skin. It was so chilly.
Well, we had to break out the jackets, at night when we would go walk on the beach and stuff. It was like, holy smokes, it's chilly. But it was good. It was a nice vacation.
Well, I will say I'm looking forward to today's show, and we're going to get into it here real quick. We've got somebody that's been on a show before, Know Your Goods, and as we Todd, I'm going to bastardize this, so you'll have to correct me. I'm like, dumb as a box of rocks. It's like, what did we talk about before here? And but I'm going to tell you, it's like. The stuff you did before was like a shiny new penny that we get some good nuggets there to take home. So now I think we're going to get to talk a little bit more about how to utilize that type of technology in protecting yourself and preparing yourself to deal with new, forced labor prevention type legislation. So welcome to our show, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it. The first Simply Trade podcast was quite a rodeo. It was a lot of fun. So I'm glad to be back.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. So for everybody that's tuning in, this is also part of our series of forced labor topics that we were. I mean, we didn't even do a poll. It's just funny how listeners and guests have been asking more and more about forced labor, and for obvious reasons. Now it's becoming even more of a hotter topic now that Mexico and Canada are jumping in as well. But because of that, we put this series together, and so we're excited to bring in Todd because we've had him before. He's very knowledgeable on this, and we thought we'd close the loop per se on this whole forced labor thing and talk about the resources and the automation behind it, because as you all know, in all the previous episodes, everybody talked about you cannot do this manually. There's no way you're going to take a product and manually trace it down and get the information that you need, especially in the 30 days that CBP gives you, to try to prove that it was not breaking any forced labor rules or laws or regulations. So we're excited to have you, Todd. Thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, no, thank you.
All right, so let's go for a second. It's like, so what's the name of your company? And because I was saying know your goods, but I think it was like KYG.
We got a trademark on that. Yeah. So KYG Trade is the name of the company, and KYG stands for Know Your Goods. And so I am happy that we got that trademark. KYG Trade is trademarked, and we call ourselves the trade attestation platform and marketplace. And we'll get into what an attestation is and what the marketplace does as we go through the podcast.
Well, from down south, we would say that's fancy.
Well, I was a partner at a Big Four accounting firm, which is all big fancy words like attestation. So that's where that came from. But I'm not a CPA, by the way. So
attestation, yeah. And
Anyway,
speaking of the marketplace, I have been seeing some news on LinkedIn and on social about your marketplace growing even more and more since the time that we last spoke. So congratulations on that. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that as well. So
that'd be terrific.
All right. So let's get into, as far as your systems and all that, again, we're talking about the Forced Labor Prevention Act. So it's anti-slavery. And one of the trends that seems to be coming into play is where, we'll talk about China. There's other parts of the world that are considered that have forced labor, but it's hard to keep up with everything. So, but let's just say that the Uyghur area of China, Northwest region, had, for example, the components made or the cotton that was raised there and made into bolts of fabric were shipped out of China to other countries. And those components then would be put into, somebody's manufacturing a widget, whatever. It could be a laptop, it could be a phone, it could be, whatever. And it has components made with forced labor. And the shirts were, the fabric was cut up, it was assembled, it was manufactured, and then goes through a substantial transformation. So it's no longer a bolt of fabric. It is now a men's shirt or a woman's blouse or whatever. Now it's imported into, or tried to be imported into the U.S., looked at it, and there's an assessment made going, sorry, it can't come in. It's got, forced labor components and whatever. And you're looking at it going, well, I bought men's shirt. I didn't buy anything, and trying to. So how can you use technology like what your company has to offer or whatever? How can somebody do this? This is getting so far over my head. I'm like, look, I'm just taking the information in front of me. How do I know where are bells and whistles that can go off to kind of give me a warning, or what do I need to do? I'm completely screwed where my goods or my company's goods are at the port and they're about to be seized.
Yeah, you got it. And Lalo said 30 days. Right. Maybe you can convince them to give you an extension. But what we're hearing is that once they hold the shipment and they ask you questions on sourcing, and there's that rebuttable presumption that in customs mind the goods were produced with forced labor. If you haven't already done your homework, if you haven't already documented your supply chain and can hand them the rebuttable presumption in the form of proof, the likelihood that you're going to be able to get the answers from your suppliers that you're going to need to document and prove that there was no forced labor in your supply chain within 30 days, I ain't betting on that. It's
okay.
Not
Let's stop right there.
Not going to be easy.
The timeline there. So, all right. So, to our listeners, I want you to say, if you're in Tupelo, Mississippi, if you're in Cushing, Oklahoma, if you are in, Little Rock, Arkansas, you are working for a company. All you're doing is buying your equipment. You're buying your supplies. You're doing whatever. You could be in the petroleum industry. You could be in electronics. You could be in apparel. Doesn't matter. And as you're going through and you're buying what you've always been doing and sourcing, and now all of a sudden there's this disruption at the port of clearance. And what do you mean I got to prove it wasn't done with forced labor? I mean, folks, you need to listen to this, because if that's when you're getting up to speed on this, you're screwed. You're out of, you're going to lose your money. It's too late. So as we talk through this, what Todd's just mentioning there, you need to be thinking ahead of time. We keep talking about this, but folks, I'm telling you, you are a small company. You don't normally do with this stuff, and you need to stop and look at it, because do you want to go to your executive management or the owner of your small little company and go, I'm sorry, there's a problem and the customs is seizing our shipment because of forced labor.
We're going to have to destroy or return. That's what it's coming down to. Those are not good options.
Talk us through this. It's like, so now that I've got everybody's attention and they're scared to death going, say, what? What did he just tell me? And I got to.
Yeah.
So what do we do, Todd? What do we do?
And I just got to say one more. This happened today. And I literally this morning when I was in this meeting, I forgot we had the podcast. But this morning I was at a meeting where there was an investment banker talking to a bunch of people about the economy. And he was saying that he specializes in investing in, ESG type related companies. And one of the industries that they looked at and that they invest in is the solar panel industry. And he mentioned that 90% of the solar panels that are imported into the U.S. are sourced from China. And this was an investor presentation about interest rates and inflation, nothing about trade and customs. He stands up there and he mentions, but the government is clamping down on forced labor. And I have 4 companies in my portfolio that have had their products detained at the port. And I'm like loving this guy because he's talking my language, and, no one else in the room even knows what I do. My wife doesn't know what I do. Right. So it was just amazing how it's trickling down and out and around and out. It's affecting everybody. It's not just affecting, the import compliance manager in Little Rock, Arkansas, or wherever you may be, but it's impacting our economy. And he was saying that customs is not just looking at the finished product, but they're getting into the components, the polysilicon, where that polysilicon was sourced to make their determination. So it's not, you can't just look at, I got a finished product. You got to get into the components, and you have to drill down and know the source of those components. And you have to have documentation to prove where you source those components and how they got from farm to your product. Because even if the raw material wasn't the growth, of the Xinjiang region in China, it could have been a raw material or an intermediate that was transported into that region, and then there was processing happening in that region, and then it came out of that region, right? So there's all kinds of gotchas out there, and there's all kinds of risk, and there's DHS has lists of entities that they've verified, and then there are NGOs that have come up with their own list of suspect entities that aren't on the government list, but I guarantee you the government in the background are looking at those NGO lists when they're targeting, when they're targeting their shipments.
When we say NGO, that's non-government organization. So it's like it could be an association, it could be whatever, but it's a non-government entity that is involved in these kinds of things. So which
the government will provide funding for, because the government, U.S. Customs, the U.S. government can't put boots on the ground in China and do inspections, right? So they will fund, and not just the U.S., other countries too, they will fund these NGOs. They will lift them up, and they will say, maybe you should focus in this area and come out with reports and do research as an NGO. So, yeah, the government leverages the work of these NGOs. But, so you got to know the source, not just of the finished product, but the components that went into the finished product. You got to know where the processing was done for the intermediates in your products. And you have to have all of that, in my opinion. And I think, Andy, you and Lalo laid it out beautifully. You got to have it at the snap of a finger when customs detains the shipment or asks the question, you want to be able to just say, yeah, we've done our research, we've done our analysis, we've done tests, we've tested cotton, we have test results, we have mapped our supply chain, we've interviewed, we've had inspectors, and for this PO, for this SKU, for this bill of material, here are our findings. And I tell you, if I don't want to say you drive up with a dump truck full of documentation, but if you have a couple of yards of documentation, hopefully customs will review that. They'll see that you have your act together, and they'll feel satisfied that you've rebutted the presumption, and they'll release your goods. Now, I don't know if that sounds like utopia, but it is possible with technology, and we can get into how we can help with that.
No, I was going to say, we had Ana Hinojosa on the show previously who said, don't throw the kitchen sink at them because then that's going to cause problems. But like you said, give them enough and as much as you have for that PO, not for the history of that product, not for like the last 10 shipments, because you may be opening yourself up to trouble anyway if you give them for other shipments, so just for that product, that PO, don't throw the kitchen sink at it either. Just give them.
Well, Lalo, you and I were thinking the same thing because I was thinking it's like, yeah, you want to inundate them with the information that's relevant. Do not inundate them with all this irrelevant information because that actually irritates the officials, and I've seen that backlash on them. So,
and I got to say, I am just really glad that you confirmed that I've not contradicted anything Ana Hinojosa has said, because she said a lot of the program here with forced labor, and she advised KYG Trade on some of the things that we're doing around forced labor too. So I'm glad I didn't say anything that would contradict what she said.
Well, the one thing that I am impressed, you guys are just rattling off her name just easy. For me, I don't know why it is the hardest thing for me to seem to get out. And Ana, forgive me again if I bastardize it. Ana Hinojosa. Is that it?
Yeah, that was good.
Okay, good enough. I was closer than what I have been. She's probably going to, like when I get to see her, she's probably going to slap me. But no, she's a great lady. She is so knowledgeable. She's so fantastic. And so with all of that, what do we do, Todd? I mean, this I come back to. So, system wise, what do you got here that can help somebody? Because right now, people are going, okay, I'm pretty scared about this and are apprehensive.
Yeah, I mean, I was in technology before I joined the Big Four, and so I'm always looking for ways to automate and streamline. And what drove me crazy, and I mentioned this on our first podcast, what drove me crazy as a consultant, charging out high hourly rates with the Big Four, was just the amount of time gathering documentation on the products that we were providing consulting for. And the more complex the regulations get, the more digging you got to do into the source of materials, bill of materials, technical specifications, ingredients, general ledger accounts, and all of that takes time. In the best of circumstances, if you're having to reconstruct what I refer to as the product genome, a product genome snapshot of how that product exists in its current state in the current moment in time, it takes time to do that because all of the information that is used to construct a product genome, it's never in one place. You're having to obtain bits and pieces of that information from different sources within the company and outside the company. So I wanted to come up with a solution that complements other global trade management software systems that are on the market today, to really enrich the essentially the item master, of these global trade management systems with detailed product attribute data, and then all of the regulations that attach to that product. So think of the product and the item master as a digital twin of what's crossing the border, and we're connecting source data and analysis and findings that attach to that digital twin. So when customs ask questions about it, you have quick answers. And it's only getting more complex. with forced labor, because how you prove there was no forced labor in a product in many cases is going to depend on the product. If it's a T-shirt, you may take one approach, which is to test the cotton. If it's a metal, then there are other types of tests that you may want to do. There's imagery. There are different approaches to verifying the geolocation and source of products and raw materials. And when I was at the Forced Labor Expo in DC earlier this year, there were 19 companies that U.S. Customs has said, hey, you need to exercise reasonable care. You need to map your supply chain. You need to test your products. Here are companies that we agree have approaches to help you do that. And so what was going on in my mind, and actually a lot of the attendees that were in the room there, and maybe 5,000 or so others that were watching it via the web, but there were people literally scratching their heads as they were listening to these presentations of these 19 companies. How am I going to manage all this, right? This company, and I can mention names of companies, can I not? Is it okay?
Yeah, of course. No, I'm sure.
So, and Anna Hinojosa, she knows these companies. And I'm sure you've been interviewing. There's a company called Originate. They have a test, for cotton. There's a company called FloraTrace, and thank you. You mentioned them. We announced that they're joining our marketplace. They have a test, for geospatial location of raw goods, cotton. Different types of products, not just cotton, and then there were other companies that were presenting there that have cameras and imagery, and they can come up with like fingerprints of metal. It's just truly amazing. But if you're sourcing a wide range of products, how are you going to manage the data flow, getting information about the products to these companies? And then how are you going to manage when they return their results? It's going to be coming in from all these different sources. How are you going to manage all that? And that's what we have solved. Our platform, it makes it easy to build the product attribute data that all these companies need to ingest and do testing or run their algorithms against. And when they come up with their findings, bring it back and we create a beautiful mosaic documentation, not the kitchen sink, but it tells the story succinctly, and it has all the backup that's necessary to rebut the presumption that there's no forced labor, country of origin, and a host of other things that we do. But it's instantaneous, and customs will have a hard time arguing that the underlying information, the bill of material information, the bill of ladings, and transportation documentation, the test results aren't valid because we're making an immutable audit record that will withstand the test of time using blockchain technology. So these records will be immutable. It could be 1, 2, 3 years. Customs could come in and want to audit this information, and they'll know they're looking at the source documentation. So we make it easy. We streamline to gather information and attach reports and findings, dare I say attestations, to the digital twin for future audit purposes.
Well, where you're going, let me stop for a second, because the term rebuttable presumption is something that it's relative. I mean, it's been around. I guess it's more of a legal term in one respect. I don't know for sure, but it has made its way into this forced labor prevention legislation and regulation. And with that, what does that mean? There's a lot of folks who are like, okay, I'm not really, well, let's look at it and break it down real quick. It's taking it in reverse, presumption, or I presume that this is going to be done with forced labor. So that's the assumption, presumption, whatever that is. When it comes in, I'm presuming that it's going to be done with forced labor. And the rebuttable is but I'm going to show evidence of it to your contrary presumption. So it's like rebuttable presumption. I'm disputing your assumption that this is done with forced labor.
Yeah, no, it's a legal principle that's recognized by the courts. Unlike a defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty, it's just the opposite. Essentially, a rebuttable presumption, is an assumption of a fact, right? And so CBP makes an assumption of fact. There was forced labor involved in this product, and that stands until someone can prove otherwise.
Okay, and so to that point, and where we're going, which you had said before, with all this thing of like the genome of a product, where you're going through, well, this is where I get it from, and then you back it up. Well, this is where they get, they have it manufactured, and then you back it up, and you reverse engineering or reverse the supply chain of that all the way back to sourced goods, the raw goods, and you're having to do that. So that information comes bit by bit. It's fragmented as it comes together. You've got to have that put somewhere where it's organized for your product.
And tie it to your PO.
Exactly. And tied to your purchase order, for especially if you got purchase orders that are sourcing goods from a foreign source. Now, you also have your domestic side, which is not going to be as a higher priority because somebody else is really needing to deal with that. But
somebody got it in.
Have to look at it. Somebody got it in if it's not made in the U.S. Now, as I'm looking through this, is trying to prioritize this, folks, you need to be looking and working with your purchasing group, and your purchasing group should be tied to the goals in this compliance side. So if you are an executive or a leader of a company, you better listen up here, because this is one of those things where purchasing usually goes off and wants to source a good. They're looking for bigger, better, faster, cheaper. They want it manufactured for the least amount they can get it for. Great. But then holistically, you better be looking at your transportation cost and your import-export requirements. Here you got all of that, and you import, and the duty comes into play and all that. But here's what's really paramount. Is now with these added, the bar's been raised on this. So your added forced labor prevention, your purchasing needs to take that into account when they are sourcing those goods. Work with your compliance and make sure your goals for your purchasing purchasing group is tied to your compliance. Because if those goods come in, hey, those goods came in, they're seized now because of forced labor. Well, who picked that factory? Who picked that vendor? Well, compliance is just following the rules, and you can get upset with them because they're the ones having to deal with the seizure, but whoever sourced it. So you got to work through that. So guys, you can see the implications here as you're talking. Now, another thing is we're talking about doing all of this for one product that you're looking at sourcing. Gee, what's your inventory of products that you have to deal with? And you can now you multiply this exponentially. There's no way for you to deal with this manually. So you better look at systems, data integration, system integration, and things of that nature. So I come back now, Todd.
Yeah,
I'll tee it up for you, buddy.
And here's the cool thing, right? So our technology is designed for both the micro, small, medium size importer of one product, just as it is for the big enterprise that has 2 million active SKUs. Because the way 10 years ago you couldn't do that, right? You're implementing SAP, you're implementing Oracle, big costly integration implementations, but now with the ability to have multi-tenant software as a service applications that a user can literally subscribe online, have an account, manually enter one product, and then create that product genome, and then have the same AI-driven tools that can determine HTS code, country of origin, free trade agreement, and look at the suppliers in that bill of materials, bounce them up against Sayari, Kairon, D&B to see if any of those suppliers are considered risk from a forced labor, the DHS list, the NGO list. A small, medium-sized importer can have that same power for not a lot of money because it's just 1, 2, 3, 4 products. That a big enterprise that has millions of products from millions of different suppliers and needs to do this at scale and fast can have. And that's what's really cool.
So that was my question, Todd, that I was going to ask you is, so this could be on demand if I get a notice from CBP. I don't have to have done it like 6 weeks ago because it's not going to take that long for it to generate the information.
No, I would caution. No, no. I guess what I'm saying is a lot of people are probably saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to play the lottery, and I'm going to hope that my shipment doesn't get picked, out of the bunch, right? And if they do, I'll deal with it. Okay. So, and the reason they're doing that is because, of what Andy said. They may have lots of products. How are they going to figure all this out for every product? It still takes time because you have to get your supply chain partners on board and feeding the system with information. So that does still take time. But if we make it easy for them to do that, if it's not a pain in the you-know-what for them to log in and upload, a PDF, an Excel sheet, or even plug in with an integration, an API integration with an extension or a plugin to their existing system, and you make it easy for them to do that, there's still going to be some time involved to work that out. Once you have all those connections, the machine learning and the MLP and all these other fancy AI terms kick in, and they can figure this stuff out pretty quickly. But I would not wait, right? Because you got to invite the supplier. They got to create their own account. They got to log in. There might be some training. But the point is it's not like a major, intensive, very costly, disruptive implementation. It can be done relatively easy with the technology that we're able to deploy today.
All right. Well, I would say, and let me jump in on this, is that what I'm picking up on this are two modes of action. One is obviously you have your existing inventory and existing, suppliers and all of that, where you need to start looking and working, reverse engineering it. The other, which I would put a higher priority on initially, is any new product that you're sourcing out there and or new vendors and suppliers. I would look at going through the appropriate vetting process that would include, actions to be, make sure you're adhering to the forced labor prevention items. And that way you're not going to, clean up one mess and just replace it with another one. It's like so take your new suppliers and start reviewing that process, putting parts. If you're an executive or a leader or owner of a company, you better have a meeting and have your purchasing folks, your logistics folks, your compliance folks, probably your legal and your IT at a bare minimum. That's 5 entities, and force them into a scenario of saying, you guys work together and make sure you cross the T and dot the I's on this, and come back with 2 action plans, one for new vendors and new supply parts. And what do we do with the existing, and what's the priority of how to work through that and make sure you're compliant and work it backwards?
Yeah, putting on my former Big Four consulting hat, we would get paid to come in and offer advice and help companies actually implement our advice. It wasn't just shelfware, and the advice, really best in class, is you don't issue a PO until you've already done that homework. You don't issue the PO until you've vetted your suppliers and you're sure that there's no forced labor. And not only that, if you want to apply for a free trade agreement And, you don't issue the PO until you've reviewed and you know that the supplier can support a certificate of origin if it comes under an audit. That's best in class. All right. And then to go a step further, it's like, Reagan, trust but verify. So you've now you've issued your PO and they're starting to put the shipping documents together. You got to do your ISF, right? So while that's happening, your advanced manifest process, you should also be intaking information to verify what they said was true by actually looking at the transaction documents, and depending on the circumstances, some of the sourcing and bill of material information as well. You should be gathering that information at the time that PO is going to leave the factory floor and make its journey, to your distribution center in the U.S. So that by the time that container or shipment arrives at the port, you already have your rebuttable presumption documentation. It's waiting at rest, anchored in an immutable audit record. So when customs asks, show me the information for this SKU on this PO, you can give it to them instantaneously. That's where you want to be. And it's not nirvana. It sounds like it might be nirvana, but we can get you there with our technology. And there's other technology providers out too. Obviously, we think we have, some of the best, most efficient and affordable, out there, without having to replace what you might currently have. We're enhancing what you currently have, not replacing what you currently have.
Well, and let's take it, Todd. Let me just jump in, because you mentioned it's like, all right, so some of this stuff is coming in, and there's a tremendous amount of cargo that comes in via ocean. And you mentioned the ISF. That's the what is it? International Security Filing.
Security Filing.
Or importers, yeah, security filings. Thank you. And with that, that's like advising customs way ahead of time. You have a shipment that before it's loaded onto the ship, you have to have your broker send that ISF. And with that, it also can act now as not only a security filing, but also the initial entry, so that you're submitting it in, customs are going to look at it and say, yeah, we're okay with this. Go ahead and load it onto the vessel, which means now it can get going and all that. Then the second part is then they'll do an assessment of the ISF/entry submission, and they'll look at it from an entry release cargo perspective. With that, with the boat on the water, if you will, the cargo's on its way, and it's days out there, whatever. If customs is going to say, I want, the old entry docs required, or they want to see more information, they're going to flag that. You're going to know that, and you will be able to supply, hence the very information you just talked about, to push back on back to them so that they can look at it, and hopefully they'll be satisfied and give it a release, all right, ahead of time. If they're not going to give it a release, but they want to inspect it, you're going to know that ahead of time if you're doing it. Don't wait until the freight physically arrives to come up with all that.
Well, that's true. Now, I am hearing, though, that shipments are getting detained, and the ports aren't telling them why. Okay, so they don't know what to give them initially. It could be something FDA related. It could be an FDA hold, right? They don't. So. And the trade is having discussions with CBP about that. Like, if you're going to detain the shipment, we need to know what the issue is so we can respond within the 30 days timely. So that is an issue. But if you've done what I was describing earlier, that best case, again, not nirvana, but I know it's obtainable. There are companies that are best in class, and they're doing this ahead of time. That's where you want to be. So whatever they ask you, if it's an FTA, if it's an origin, if it's a forced labor, if it's a conflict minerals, if it's an FDA certification, you're ready to give them that answer at the snap of a finger, and not say, we'll get back to you, and go hunt for
it. Todd, I just want to let you know, I want you to wrap up with whatever you have, because I don't know how much more time you have, but I want you to get in the last word. So And I know we're going to see you in a few weeks in Oklahoma City for the GTech conference over at for NCBFAA, and so we're excited to talk to you some more there. But anything else that you might want to wrap up and just let our audience know?
No, I just technology is really you have to address this issue with technology. And when I say technology, I mean something streamlined, efficient, collaborative, record keeping, all in one place. You got to figure out how to pull these disparate sources of product information into one place efficiently, and then be able to share that information with your consultants and partners who are trying to attest that your product meets requirements. And so there's a lot of different professional service providers, solution providers out there that have their own specialty. Consultant X is specializing in free trade agreements. Consultant Y is specializing in testing cotton, and so you're going to have these different providers that are all trying to help you and attach their attestations to your product so that you can answer the questions to the authorities anywhere in the world, not just the U.S. You got to be able to figure out how to do that efficiently. And, we figured that out. Efficiently, newsflash is not emails, PDFs, and attachments. It's just, that's an improvement over fax, but today it's just not going to get you there. The SharePoint site and emails and attachments, not efficient, not the way to go. So, we're solving for that. We're getting rid of emails, PDFs, and attachments. We are applying AI and blockchain to making the whole ecosystem for you and your suppliers more efficient. So that was my that was the last word I wanted to get in there.
Well, folks, we're going to have Todd's contact information, his company, with our show notes and whatnot. Here's the key. We've talked about this is really advanced stuff. This is not your basics, but it gets into the basic fundamentals of how you should be vetting new products, new vendors, and things of that nature. If you're an executive or a leader of a company, I implore you, please get a meeting scheduled of your sourcing or purchasing group, your compliance group, your logistics and transportation group, your IT, and your legal, and pull them together just for a good discussion and look at what products you have. Review some of your purchase orders of the past and put your customs hat on. Your customs. How do you know that these goods were not done with forced labor? They're going to ask you. So put yourself in that role and ask of your staff. And if they can't really come together and it's him and Han, it's okay. But you need to know that so you can take action to help protect yourself. And at the end of the day, with what Todd was talking about, is then the other thing is with everybody doing their thing and everything's working out fine, you yourself should take steps to verify what you've got and maybe take an expert with you to go to some of these locations where you're sourcing your goods and just look for it yourself. For what it was, Todd, another great show, I think. And Lala, some great questions. So I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great day because this is going to be one that we're going to come back and keep talking about, I think.
Yep. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you guys at GTech in Oklahoma City.
Same here. Thank you, Todd. We'll talk to you soon then.
Bye, guys.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.